Very good evening, morning, and afternoon to all of you who have joined us today. Thank you for joining in, first of all, on a Saturday evening, as usual. And sorry, the yesterday's workshop got cancelled because of the speaker's ill health. And but we are today here with an exciting topic. It's around the most crucial thing you need to achieve even before you pick up your pen to build that first wireframe. It's about understanding your users, understanding the people for whom you are designing a particular product. It's user research 101, and we have Ashima with us, who's the speaker of the day. Ashima is a user advocate and thought leader practicing design for over 10 years. She guides aspiring designers at the UX Guys Tribe and covers topics like human factors, user psychology, research methods, how to land a UX job, and many more. Her newest project includes the Undesign podcast on Spotify. And so, a very warm welcome to you, Ashima. The stage is all yours.
Thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Let me know if you guys can see it. Okay, so today's topic, as you all know, is user experience research. And here's our agenda for today. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about myself. And then we're going to talk about UX research and the design process and where it falls in. And then we're going to talk about a few research methods, I think I've picked 10 of them. And the main reason that I've picked these 10 research methods that I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about when to use which method. I think that's more important. And in my years of mentoring, I feel like that's the question I've gotten most is, okay, I know about research methods and there's so many tools and resources out there for me to know what kind of research methods there are, but there's no framework for me to follow. And I don't know when to use which one. And that's the question that I get the most. Is that something that you guys feel like is also your experience? Zambia, okay, nice. Yes, yep. Okay, great. So since everybody is kind of on the same page of we know where to find them, I'll breeze through the research methods quicker and we'll get to the framework that I've come up with and we can spend a little more time there. And another announcement that I wanted to make is I will be sharing a handout with you guys, so the deck will be on there. So for now, don't worry about taking notes. I don't know if you guys are ready to. Don't worry too much about taking notes because you will have the deck. Just be with the topic and think of questions while you have me here. So a little bit about me. So you guys already got a great introduction, so I won't talk too much about it, but as you know, the UX Guys is something I'm very passionate about. I've mentored before at Springboard and of course ADP List, as well as the Institute of Product Leadership, which is why I'm so in tune with newer designers who are coming in. And I think that it's great you guys have so much energy and so much curiosity. So I'm looking forward to seeing your questions later. Okay, so for now, let's talk about where does UX research fall into the design process. Now, there's a bunch of design processes out there, but they're all about like this, right? You start with empathize, you go on to define, you ideate, you prototype, and then you test, and then it's starting all over again. So can anyone tell me in what stage you can find the research process or research methods? Where do they fall in? Anybody have any ideas or suggestions of where it falls into the process? Empathize, define. Definitely a lot of research goes into both of those, but I have to say that it's all over the place. even when you are done with a prototype, you want to test it, you want to do a rapid prototyping test, and essentially that is your testing. Even when you're ideating, you are trying to validate, and that's when your research methods again come in. So really, at every stage, there's a research method that works best in the different stages, and we'll get to that as well. So let's take a look at a few research methods. Like I said, I've picked out 10 of them, and they're all over the place. And I've done it on purpose, that there is no real flow to it, or it doesn't coincide with the chronological order of the design process. So here we have usability lab studies where participants are brought into a lab, and it's mostly one-on-one with a researcher. Sometimes there's more researchers and fewer participants, and they're given a set of scenarios that lead to tasks and usage of specific interests within the product or service. So this is a very specific task that they're given. So if in the entire product, you just want to talk about, let's say, onboarding. So that's the specific task that they're given, and the user is either observed or there's parameters that are predetermined before this user comes in. Now, with usability lab studies, I do want to mention that this is something that participant isn't going to be in a lab when they're actually using the product. So you want to be careful about what kind of aspects you're trying to monitor with the product over here, right? Because if, for example, let's say you're designing something that is for work, like a work suite or an enterprise application, people are not going to be in the same mindset when they come into a usability lab study. However, it is going to be better results for a enterprise app when you bring them into an actual office and you have them work on specific tasks, as opposed to if you're trying to do something that's for leisure. So if you're doing like a gaming app and you bring them into a lab, it's going to be a very different result. So you want to be careful about what you're trying to monitor with these studies. Then we have ethnographic field studies, and it's fairly straightforward, where researchers meet with and study participants in their natural environment, where they would most likely encounter the product or service in question. Of course, you do need to understand a lot more about user psychology when you are practicing ethnography. And that's a whole other field as well that you want to familiarize yourself with if you ever choose to implement ethnographic field studies. Then we have participatory design, which, as it says, straightforward. Participants are given design elements or creative materials in order to construct their ideal experience in a concrete way that expresses what matters to them the most. So in a way, you're trying to assess their priorities, right? And this could even be you as the researcher could be observing, you could be moderating the task more hands-on, you could be fly on the wall and just recording. So again, you want to be very careful about how you conduct this as well. So of course, we're going to be talking about when to use what, but I would say familiarize yourself with best practices for all of these. So with these three, I think we're done with. I just want to check in if you guys have any questions before we move forward. Is everything straightforward so far? And like I said, we're going to be discussing a few more research methods, and then we'll move on to my framework. If not, great. I can take questions at the end as well. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Are there any questions in the Q&A section? Nope. Okay, so we'll get back to questions at the end. Our next research method is focus groups where we have groups of 3 to 12 participants that are led through a discussion about a set of topics. So this is more, you're trying to get feedback. And again, look how it says are led through a discussion. And there's a reason that I'm emphasizing on this, and we'll get back to that. It's about a set of topics giving verbal and written feedback. So we're trying to understand what their attitude or thoughts are about certain, let's say, features or certain gestures or what have you, depending on what you're trying to test them on. Then we've got interviews. And this is one of my favorite ones because you have to tailor every interview before you actually go in and talk to a user. You need to make sure that they're also very comfortable with telling you that your product sucks. They should be able to bring that across quickly and effectively. And that's the rapport that you're trying to create with interviews, right? So here a researcher meets with participants one-on-one is best to discuss in depth what the participants thinks about the topic in question. So again, it could be really broad, it could be really specific, but what you want to do is make sure that you're not asking leading questions and you are leaving the user to express themselves however they'd like. And that I feel like has yielded the best research data or input for me to take forward. Because again, you have to remember that once you're done with the actual research method and interacting with the user, you have to take all this data back and then you have to analyze it. So you want to, of course, it comes with practice and it becomes more clear the more you do it. So I would say if you're new, make sure that you are doing an interview, at least one interview for your portfolio, so that whoever is reviewing your portfolio understands that you are familiar with the nuances that go along with interviewing. So that's a tip that I would leave out there for you guys. Then we have eye tracking. So an eye tracking device is configured to precisely measure where participants look as they perform tasks or interact naturally with websites, applications, physical products, or environments. So there's a lot of tools for this. I won't go too deep into it, but it could be done even remotely. And it could be something that that yields a lot of data. And you could just send out a couple of screens. I've seen that the best results are when you tell the users that, hey, I'm sending you a couple of screens, check it out. It's not going to take more than 3 minutes. And that time of, like, you know how if you start a medium article, or if you a lot of places do that now, a lot of blog posts tell you how many minutes it would take to read. So if you can tell your user that, hey, I'm sending you this, it will take only this much time, and they will actually open it and they will read it. And a lot of these tools that I mentioned earlier, they leverage their device cameras and laptop cameras, phone cameras. So you just want to warn them that you will have to give some permissions. So that's something, again, a few tips that I would give with eye tracking. Okay. Then we have usability benchmarking. Now this is lightly scripted. This isn't completely scripted. This is somewhere in between. And you want to pay attention to how it says lightly scripted. And this is done with several participants using precise and predetermined measures of performance. So this could also be when you're testing your own product's previous version against the next version. Or it could be like an A/B testing where you have two versions of the same task. So like I said, so if you're onboarding, for example, and you have version A that allows you to onboard with, let's say, biometrics versus not having biometrics and just doing the usual. You want to compare and contrast to see what works better. So that's A/B. And then you could also actually benchmark against your competitor. So that's another way of conducting usability benchmarking. So there's 3 different kinds. Then we have moderated remote usability studies, which again, is fairly straightforward. It's just a long name, but it's essentially when usability studies are conducted remotely with the use of tools such as screen sharing, software, and remote control capabilities. So as straightforward as it is, my tip would be to keep in mind that with remote usability studies, a lot of times I have encountered the usual Zoom questions before and after a meeting, like, can you hear me? Can you see this? So a lot of it is very distracting. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. And that's just my tip. Then we have concept testing, which is much earlier in the whole design process. So this is when a researcher shares an approximation of the product or service. So it could be like a very early prototype. And basically they're trying to capture the key essence or the value proposition of a new concept or product in order to determine if it meets the needs of the target audience. It could be done one-on-one or with larger numbers of participants and either in person or online. So this is very early, it's more MVP. However, it could be even halfway through your product design, or you're done with a version 1 and you want to test one particular feature that you might add. And so that is also sometimes called concept testing. Then we have email surveys, and I feel like with email surveys, again, with my experience, I have told my team to stay away from trying to collect data through email surveys because a lot of us are probably targeted more with these email surveys than we send out. And I say this simply because, and I don't mean to predispose you guys. So again, think about whether or not this would fit in your product lifespan or your product's journey. If it actually makes sense, then go for it and do it. But I try to steer my team away from doing this and make sure that we try to be as personable with the users and collect as much data as possible. However, email surveys are great for quantitative data. Okay, so that being said, let's talk about qualitative versus quantitative methods. Okay, so before I move forward, I just want to do a quick check-in again. Hi, Bala. Okay, so no questions so far, and we're good to go with the questions at the end. Okay, so this is another question that I get a lot as a mentor. But I feel like the more you work with these methods, the more you understand them. And like it says, due to the nature of their differences, qualitative methods are much better suited for answering questions about why or how to fix a problem. So again, we'll go deeper into why or how later, but when you're working on a product as a designer and something the user is not able to understand how to move forward, or the user doesn't understand certain either gestures or features, or something's not visible to them, or you felt like as a designer, oh, of course, this is very obvious. And this is the obvious way to move forward. However, that wasn't so evident to the user. You want to go with qualitative. And then when you want to find out about how many and how much, it's quantitative. So I know that's fairly on the nose, but hopefully I was able to go a little deeper with when to use qualitative versus quantitative. Aniket asks which method can be used for making a portfolio and how to find people who will be a fit for the product. Okay, so I feel like those are two different questions. Correct me if I'm wrong. So when you're making a portfolio, you want to showcase that you're able to handle all kinds of methods as a designer or as a researcher, and that you're able to figure out when to use which one. And then the next best thing would be you're familiar with the best practices for that method. And then how to find people who will be a good fit for the product. So I feel like, again, correct me if I'm wrong, you're thinking more academically. When you're actually out there in the real world, your user base will already be identified and it will be very well defined. So most companies and most products have a target audience in mind. So that's something that you don't have to worry about just yet. And I would say focus on building your portfolio, being more familiar with these methods, understanding the nuances, especially when you're interacting with a user. You want to be very careful about allowing them to voice their opinions and voicing their, well, how they feel about the product. Maybe they think it's great. But you want to make sure that it's actionable. So these are the nuances that you're dealing with as a researcher. And that's what you want to showcase in your portfolio, because any good manager, any good design manager that's going through your portfolio will understand very quickly that, okay, you were able to take this part of the product that didn't work. You understood what method to employ to make sure that you got the right data, the right actionable data, to then give a design solution. And then you took that design solution and implemented it very well. So does that answer your question? Okay, well, I'll wait. We can come back to this. Yes, okay, perfect. Good. Good, good. So keep the questions coming, guys. So let's talk about when you should be using particular methods, right? So we kind of breezed through the 10 different methods. And like I said, they weren't in any particular order, and for a reason. So I feel like any mentee who comes to me, I always redirect them to the Nielsen Norman Group page. Have you guys heard of these guys? They're pretty good. Just a yes or no. Yes, yeah. Their stuff is, it's very good. It's very concise. And you always know how to follow up because each post is going to be a quick read, and then you know where to find other resources very quickly with them. So I would definitely suggest that you guys go through this. And I also always say that their copy and their content is as good as my master's degree. And I went to the University of Kansas, and I had a great mentor. And I feel like the Nielsen Norman Group also does a very good job, and I often compare their content to my course curriculum. So that's saying something. So definitely check them out if you already haven't. But this is what I generally redirect my mentees to. Now, what you want to know before starting any research method is, what are you trying to find out? Are you trying to find out what people do with your product or without your product if you're starting out? Are you trying to figure out how many or how much of the app doesn't work for them or is failing? Do you want to know where they're failing? In case you want to know where they're failing, do you want to know how or why they're failing in these parts? Are they not able to understand? Is this the wrong gesture? A lot of times it, in my experience, has been we haven't identified the target audience right. And in one particular healthcare app, we made it state of the art. We put in the latest trends. We put in all kinds of gestures, and that's what the business wanted, and they were so happy with it. And when we rolled it out, a lot of people couldn't use it and couldn't figure out why. And we were like, but we have swipe gestures, and we have the refresh gesture, and then we have great feedback from our testing. But most of these people who were using the app were over the age of 50 and 60, and they were only able to do basic menus and clicks of buttons and go next instead of swiping right, or hit back instead of swiping left. So are you trying to figure out how or why to fix it? Or are you trying to figure out what people say about it to each other? Are they giving recommendations about your application? Are they, it may not even be about your app itself. It may just be, what do people think about using, like I said, with the enterprise applications, people are generally more tuned into, oh, it's a work thing. And that's their mindset when it comes to enterprise applications versus, like we talked about, the gaming applications. They're generally a lot more relaxed because people are, they're sitting on their couches with their controllers and they're with their buddies and they're probably munching. So that's the attitudinal difference. And that's what you're trying to gauge over here. So keeping this in mind, let's talk about the few research methods that we talked about. For example, eye tracking, it is purely behavioral, and it could fall into either qualitative or quantitative, depending on the way you modulate their tasks and what you're trying to study. With usability benchmarking, again, it's more behavioral. You're trying to understand what works better. Is it your product's version A versus your product's version B? Then when it comes to usability lab studies, it's more in the qualitative side because, it's more in the qualitative side because you're trying to understand how people would use the particular aspect, and you're there face to face. So it has an ethnographic aspect to it as well. And then with ethnographic, it could go both behavioral and attitudinal, depending on the questions that you have formulated. So is it coming together, hopefully, for you guys? And is there anything that kind of jumps out at you and isn't clear? Let me know. And then you'll also see down here, there's a key for context of product use. So here we've got either natural use of product, which is out where you're actually going to use it, versus scripted or lab-based. And then we also have a combination. And then there's decontextualized, which is not using the product. And that's generally done either before there's a product Or for example, there's email surveys when you're not really using the product, you're just checking your email and you're hit with a survey. So hopefully, okay, no comments yet. I do have a question from Daniel. What are situations where you care more about people, what people say than what people do? When I think of people saying at the same time, I feel like we have to be aware of that they frequently don't follow through and act on what they say. Okay, yeah, I would say that's a great question, but I feel like you're also overthinking it a little bit because in this case, we're just thinking about the product. And when we're talking about their attitudinal, what they're saying and what they're thinking and what they're actually doing, their behavior, it tends to reflect. So like I said, with an enterprise product, people are thinking work. So they tend to be a little stressed while using it. And they also feel like with an enterprise application, they tend to spend more or less time on it because that's not their actual daily work, right? So for example, I designed a travel and expense management tool that was for Biocon. And these guys are just on this tool for getting their manager's approval, or if they're a manager, they're just there to approve their subordinates' travel and expense. And that's not their usual job. That's just because they're going for a conference, but they need to quickly move on to the next meeting, right? So you'll see that attitude of, oh, this is really stressful and I need to spend less time on this. You'll actually see it reflect in their behavior where they're not actually going to spend too much time on it. Even though they might open it more number of times in a day, it's just a quick cursory glance, and then they're off to their next meeting or they're onto their next task. So that's just an example of how their attitudes do tend to reflect in their behavior. But when you're trying to, what are you really trying to figure out is what you should be more tuned into. Does that make sense? Right, I'm just gonna take that as a yes and move on. But I'm open to coming back to that. The next thing that you want to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out what is the best method for you to implement at that point is what stage is your product in, right? So remember how we started with it happens in every stage of the design process? What you're really trying to do with each stage is very important, right? So your goals are with the strategize phase when it's much earlier, when you're trying to ideate, when you're trying to empathize, right? That's when you're still exploring and choosing new directions and opportunities, as opposed to when you're executing, which is your prototyping stage, when you're trying to optimize the designs, right? And you're trying to inform. So here you're kind of validating what you got in the previous step. And then we have the assess stage, which is by itself a testing stage. So this is where you're trying to measure your product performance against itself or its competition. So taking a look at these goals, your approaches are going to vary based on what it is you're trying to do. And then you can start to see what are the typical methods. And again, these are just the typical methods. There's no hard and fast rule that you can't do cart sorting much earlier on. You definitely can. And I myself do it with information architecture. I like to do cart sorting and figure out before I have the first wires out. I always have a cart sorting of the content and the categories that we think the content should be in, and then we do our card sorting. So that's another thing that you want to layer on top of your previous table that we went over, which is your different quadrants of qualitative, quantitative, behavioral, and attitudinal. So I see a question. If I'm conducting, Anonymous says, if I'm conducting a research in surveys and the QS I'm taking should be in the design perspective, like QS based on design solution, or just I want to know about them, the users. Okay, so really quickly, you're talking about the QS is the questions, I'm guessing. That's a great question. Okay, so like I said, with each method, there's going to be best practices. So I zipped through them and I give you my own personal tips because you're not going to find my tips on these other resources, but you will find a whole lot of content on the different kinds of research methods. And you want to, again, tailor it based on whether or not you're trying to figure out specific parts of why is your product not working, or what is the best way to take it forward. So depending on that is what you want to take it forward. Hopefully that helps, because it's a very general question. And I would very strongly suggest that everybody check out, of course, ProApp as well, and Nielsen Norman as well. And I also have this community that you're very welcome to join and ask your questions there, because it is a community of designers, and we're all mostly on the same stage of getting our foot through the door. With Daniel has another question. Would it be typical to run interviews or even focus groups during the strategy stage? Definitely. Yeah, it is. So if it is a reiteration and you're back at the strategy stage, it's probably you're going to get more data, more actionable data. With it being the first round, you want to be very careful about, again, not leading your user. You want to make sure that the interview structure has a flow to it, and you're clear about which questions you want to be open-ended, which questions you want to have a particular answer. Now, again, without leading them, if it is A versus B, you want to be able to put these options out there for them to pick them. So you really want to be careful about interviews. You want to make the user feel comfortable. And most of the times there's a device recording them, which also tends to put people on the spot. But with that, honestly, you just want to make sure that you're maintaining your eye contact and that you're not treating them like a subject. With most great companies, they already have a consent form for your users to sign. So if you're doing it academically, make sure that you have a consent form to record them. And yeah, and I think that, again, make sure that you are just making them feel comfortable. That's it. And yeah, go through all of the best practices out there. Abdullah is asking which type of community. Yeah, hold on. It is the UX Guys tribe, and I will drop in a link for you guys to join, so don't worry about that. So hopefully that answered your questions, Anonymous and Daniel. I'm curious, is this the same Daniel that attends pretty much all of my sessions from Germany? If it is, great. Okay, Nishal asks, I'm new to UX RMA, a little bit about eye tracking. Does it use camera on the cell track? Yeah, so it depends on the tool that you're using. Honestly, if I were you, I would just do a quick Google search, because there's newer tools every 2 to 3 months. And what it does is basically it tracks your eye movement and it marks out the hot spots on the screen, and it tells you where the user is spending the most time. And no surprise here, but it is mostly the top left to right, and then top to bottom is the general trend, unless you're in the Middle East or another Arabic country where it starts from right to left and then again top to bottom. So that's our general eye tracking. However, sometimes what you want to do as a designer is you want to test if having a different color changes that around. Or if you want to emphasize a CTA, or you want to lead the user down a certain path, that's when it comes in handy, and you can actually tell that, okay, yeah, I'm definitely going to be able to get the user's attention if I change this feature, or if I have a rolling, you know how in news channels they have rolling text. So yes, Daniel, hi. Yeah, so so that's generally how eye tracking works. Okay, so now you guys have a few of my tips, and hopefully a little more of an idea of how to figure out which direction you want to take. And don't worry about it. I know most of you are just starting out. So I would say that give it some time, and spend a lot of time. If you are building your portfolio, make sure that you practice a lot of these methods, and showcase it the best that you can, because it is very important. I can tell you that I, as a design manager, I make sure that the person I'm employing does not need too much time for me to spend with them. I don't want to be able, I want to be able to do my tasks as well. So it would be great if the person I bring onto my team can handle a specific part of the task at least, right? So maybe if you're great with particular kinds of research methods, emphasize that, so that your manager knows that, okay, this is what I'm in for. So yeah, good luck to you guys. So here's the summary, right? We talked about qualitative versus quantitative. Of course, we talked about the 10 methods earlier, but like I said, that's something that you can get really anywhere. Then we talked about when and what are we trying to understand, right? So when is the stage of your design process? Where is your product at? And what are we trying to understand as researchers? As researchers, what are we trying to understand from our user, right? And then, of course, what stage is your product at is the last thing that you want to talk about. So yeah, so I'm open to our questions. That's the end of our today's session, and I'm going to drop the link in to the deck as well as the community. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Ashima. I think before we move ahead, uh, I will take 5 minutes, but I have one question for you. So, can you let us know more about the UX guys? And like, I just wanted to understand in the starting as well, but I did not
Yeah,
get the
sure.
chance. It sounds very interesting. So, just wanted to understand the kind of community it is and uh, the level and what kind of people are joining. Are they just the beginners, or there are people who are just starting off, or just somewhere in between career switch, or some confused souls around there?
Yeah, so honestly, it's for everybody. It's for people who are at all walks of life within their design career. However, we do have more people joining us who are starting out new, and I feel like that's because I keep mentoring um, through different platforms, including ProApp, including ADP List, including Springboard, and that's why I feel like I'm attracting newer UXers. And so yeah, so there's different channels within the Discord server that I would invite you guys to explore, find where you guys fit in. And yeah, this is essentially what you guys can expect is, we're talking essentially about fundamentals. We talk about both research and design processes. And I tend to bring in a lot of my expertise of what I've experienced at work. I've worked at T-Mobile, I've worked for companies like Biocon, I've worked for Lenskart, Starbucks. So yeah, I tend to bring in, along with all of whatever you're gonna get in terms of resources, I also tend to layer it with my experience. And of course, I work one-on-one with whoever wants to set up a one-on-one. You guys can expect to roadmap your own career and figure out what your learning goals are. Yeah, and it's all been started out because I saw that there was a very big gap with structured courses with Springboard. I feel like I think it's a brilliant course out there, but it isn't really made for India or people who are very busy, really. People who only have a couple of hours a week. So
Sort
that's
of a crash course. Like,
almost, yes, but it's very tailored to you. And so it's almost like a university course where you have these different subjects and electives, and then you get to mix and match. It's essentially what you get to do, but these are 1 hour sessions and you get to decide, where do you want to attend? Do you want to do this particular assignment or not? Does it work for you? If you're only going to be a researcher, then you don't actually have to work on Figma extensively, right? So that's what you can expect. But of course, the community is more for you guys to just get together, talk about your portfolios, talk about where you've been applying, job boards, that kind of stuff. So it's really kind of an umbrella term, and everybody is just kind of on there talking about different events. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and drop it in if that works, or should I?
yeah, sure. You can drop it over at the link. That's completely fine.
Perfect.
I think that's great because the one point you mentioned, that people who are more into UX research, they need to lean towards extensive Figma learning and other tools learning. So it's completely, that gap is something which still exists. And I think with mentors like you and experts like you, will somehow sort it out soon.
Hopefully, hopefully. Yep. So there you go. That's a simple handout, and that's got
Yeah, actually,
everything.
yeah. You can just change that chat to everyone and then share it. Right now, it's just shared with the host and the panelist. With
Okay.
the drop down, yeah.
There you go.
Awesome. Cool. Okay. So thank you, Ashima. Before we move into the Q&A section, I'll just take 5 minutes. And I know most of you are already aware about ProApp, but for those who are new to it, it's a place to learn all things design, which help you kickstart your design journey and grow as a designer. We started with one single course, UI design, in back in 2019, and right now we have 75 plus bite-sized design courses. Along with it, it has been a year of us conducting these weekly workshops with experts like Ashima herself, and we are constantly evolving, and the mission remains the same: making learning accessible and affordable for everyone. And we are also coming up with some amazing video content in terms of masterclass and many other interesting features. We'll also soon come up with, I believe, job boards as well. And since you guys have supported us for so long, we're offering the lifetime membership of ProApp at 95%. And this is just exclusive to our workshop audience. And even in the app, you won't get it. So I think I'll just share the link, and till the time we are here, you can just go check it out, purchase, and let me know if you have any issues. Meantime, we can start with the Q&A section. Cool. Okay, how to stick with a design decision?
Okay, so I'm interested in knowing, do you mean, is your team not sticking with it, or is it something, are you looking for a validation? So if it's validation, then you're of course going to go back to your drawing board and you're going to try to figure out what design research method to implement. If it's your team that isn't sticking to the design decision, you probably want to bring them all on the same page. And I know that this is tough in startups, in environments where it's very fast paced. They don't want to do, oh, your decision might change the next day. Well, you want to make sure that you are conducting your research methods very thoroughly, so that there is really no other way for you to go, and you have figured out your best next step as soon as you're done analyzing the data for the research. And if that, honestly, it's all proof of concept based design decisions that you want to take. So hopefully that doesn't, that doesn't alter your course. And then hopefully you also have a strong design manager who can rein you in and hopefully take time to explain why you're doing things a certain way. So it also depends on your team. And I know this wasn't your question, but I just want to finish my thought, because this is very common that, your team doesn't stick to the design decision. You, like I said, you want to bring everybody on the same page. You want to be a strong advocate for the user, and everything is for the user, and nothing is for you or your manager or the PM or for the dev team. Everything's for the user. So you really want to have data that could sway people on the floor and make sure that everybody understands that, okay, this is what the user needs, and therefore we can't really change that.
Right. But somehow maybe businesses get into, in a dilemma, like whether to lean onto the user end or onto the financial aspect of it.
Right.
So that's the point where most of the designers get stuck, like what to do now. And
yeah, so that's a great question, honestly, because that happens a lot.
Right.
So as a designer, you're going to be stuck in the middle. So you
Right.
want to pose the question to the business and make sure that they have their priorities right. Because if they feel like they want to give design more weightage, then that should be the case for that quarter or that particular phase or that journey. And that's why a lot of companies have agile, where there's different journeys and there's different JOs, POs, and BOs.
Right.
And in different segments, they have different weightage to either business or design. And they're very clear about it. That doesn't change. So if business needs to overwrite design, you as a designer need to know when that happens, and it can't change. So you do want to be firm about it from the beginning. When you're getting your requirements, you want to ask questions and you want to make sure that it's not going to change, and you get it in email, you get it in writing. You make sure a bunch of them sign off on it, and then you move forward. And that's really the ideal way to go about it.
That's correct. We have one more question in the chat section. As a UX designer, if you join a startup who does not focus much on research and they directly want you to give results, and as a beginner, I find it really challenging to work with a product without research data, maybe not organized data.
Okay, that's also very common. So with the startup, again, you want to try to find your ally, because within a startup, you'll find that in upper management, somebody really understands the value of design. So you want to find that ally, and you want to keep bringing up that proof of concept of maybe start up with more qualitative stuff, because that does tend to sway business easier. And you don't have to learn a bunch of business jargon to convey what you are trying to do. So try to do more qualitative research in the beginning. Make sure that you are getting your foot through the door in a lot of design decisions. Make sure that they're hearing you out. And honestly, this is probably very not common opinion, but I would say that if it really is not working, then you really want to ask yourself if that's where you want to stay.
Right.
Because that is, do you value yourself as a designer? You have the expertise, and these guys don't want to focus on research. They don't value, or they don't have the maturity for a UX designer or for a UX team. So yeah, that's also something we actually talk about in the latest episode of the podcast. So definitely check that out as well. I think that's linked into.
What was the name of the podcast? Yeah, Undesign.
Undesign, but I have linked in the latest episode in this Notion page, so you guys can find it there.
Cool. And I think with the adding to your above point, with this new wave of especially after the COVID scenes, this new wave of companies evolving around design has begun. But when they actually come and understand the cost involved in each and every phase, they just want to eject it at some point and reach to the results faster. And in the meantime, they somehow try to opt out the entire process, and then the product somehow fails. It will, because it is not solving what they started for. And I think I completely respect your opinion that as a designer, you should know what you value. Do you really want to stick to it and just work for the sake of the experience, or you really want to learn?
Yeah, exactly. Like I said, find your ally. If sometimes people are open to learning, so you want to find that person who wants to learn in upper management and educate them. So a lot of times as a UX designer, you're also tasked with educating your team or the higher management. And yeah, like I said, if that all else fails, then you really want to reflect on your values and your contributions.
Right. Cool. Guys, we have Ashima for a few more minutes. You can ask the questions if you have any more questions. Mm. In the meanwhile, I'll paste the link to your LinkedIn profile just in
Yeah,
case they want
for
to
sure.
reach out to you later.
Of course.
Mm.
And if you do reach out to me on LinkedIn, just let me know that it's through this so that I can actually go ahead and accept, because get a lot of requests.
I think you might have recently received mine as the first.
Yes. Okay.
Cool. I think we do not have any further questions.
Yeah, that's
So
fine, because you know where to find me.
yeah,
And yeah, I had a great time. Hopefully you guys learned something.
same here. Thank you so much for doing this with us. And uh, cool. Have a great weekend, everyone. Save the link. Use the code first 500 and paste it again. And reach out to Ashapa. And thank you so much. I'll definitely connect you via the UX guys community and see if we can do something together. That would be
Yeah.
perfect and great.
Yeah, I would love that for sure.
Thank you so much. Have a great
Awesome.
weekend, everyone. Have a great weekend, Ashpa.